and what you do. So if you're a student or your profession.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Benjamin Clifton. I'm a student.
Hi, I'm Tess Clifton. I am a teacher of middle school science.
Michaela Clifton, student and in-home caregiver.
Taylor Lake, proto-teacher.
And Brianna Clifton, student and proto-counselor.
Proto-counselor.
All right, so everybody is getting a sheet of 8.5 by 11. You all already have your pens.
Or pencil.
Or pencil. All right. So everybody needs to be silent, listen, and follow the instructions exactly as they interpret them. So no asking your neighbors, nothing. And the purpose is to replicate a drawing.
Oh no.
I'm going to describe the drawing to you. And these are the instructions. On your 8.5 by 11, draw a circle. These are very simple. Everybody can do it. All right, now draw a triangle inside of the circle. Draw a square in the corner, meaning of your paper, not the triangle.
That was free for interpretation.
That's what I clarified. Now sign your name on the paper.
Now only do instruction 1 and 2.
No. All right, now everybody hold up your paper. All right, so now what you're going to find is that every picture is different in some way. Now, your pictures do not match, obviously. So we're going to try this again. Turn your papers over. Now. All right, so we are going to draw a circle that is approximately 4 inches in diameter in the center of your paper.
Are we portrait or landscape?
It doesn't
That's a
matter.
question.
Portrait.
Of paper.
I should have clarified that one, so portrait.
4 inches in diameter?
We're still not asking questions. 4
Oh,
inches
I'm
in
sorry.
diameter in the center of your paper. It's going to be approximate since I don't have protractors.
It's about as big as my circle was. Oh, damn it.
Now draw a triangle inside of the circle so that all 3 corners are touching the circle. Alright, number 3. Draw a 1-inch square on the bottom left corner of your paper. Alright, finally, sign your name, spelled out Y-O-U-R-N-A-M-E, on the bottom right side of your paper. Okay. Taylor, we're not being perfectionists. I need everybody to hold up their paper.
No, damn it. That's not portrait.
Alright, so
I'm sorry,
the
that was my
exception
fault.
of portrait versus landscape, now we're much more similar to the original drawing.
Do you
So,
have it?
I actually don't. So the purpose of this activity was to show that communication is not, and detailed communication is not only for listeners, but for speakers as well. And we need to communicate effectively and listen effectively to have the results that are intended. This is particularly relevant in school, which was the main focus of our communication exercises. So why do you guys think that originally your guys' drawings were different? Mom?
Number one, the directions weren't at all specific. They didn't give size. They didn't tell you where to place it on your paper. They didn't give you any instructions whatsoever about where it went. So people just put it where it was either pleasing for them or most convenient.
Okay, so basically the directions, they were basic, they had absolutely no detail, and that speakers need to be specific.
Mm-hmm.
Ben?
Different personality traits. The instructions were vague, so individuals filled in what they were most comfortable with. If the person is fairly loud and self-confident, the circle and triangle were big. If they're a quiet individual, the circle and triangle were smaller.
Or maybe not.
Well then.
It's possible. It depends on how
Okay.
you feel from time to time, too.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Nope.
Taylor?
Well, I feel if you're creatively inclined, you also sign your name differently than you might if you were just going to do it straightforward.
Okay.
And also, I didn't know how many things we were going to have to draw, so I left space. And the second time, it was like, if we were going to do the same thing again, I knew that we were going to be done.
Right.
And so I knew the space given, so that's the other reason, because I didn't know how many things we were going to have to draw, so I wanted to have enough space.
Okay.
I'm going to have to draw more frequently. I'm not pleased with my circle or my
Alright.
square.
So to keep this moving forward, how do you guys think this activity is applicable to your experiences in a classroom? Either as the teacher or as the student.
Well, again, like you said, if your instructions are not explicit, then it leaves a lot of room for either, like for instance, behavior. If your instructions with behavior and you're modeling, if you don't model behavior, then kids really don't always have a guideline they really understand, especially if they don't understand some of the terminology.
Okay.
So
would terminology be something you would need to clarify, or would you have preemptively clarified for your students?
I frequently teach it. Occasionally I'll literally ask the kid what it means. So if I said, for instance, we need to clarify this, and people just sat there, and I would say, what does the word clarify mean? And maybe some kids would raise their hand and do that. I did it 2 or 3 times, in each period today because of going over some CST stuff. So explicit, I love the document cameras because you put things under the document camera. And so if you're drawing, they're getting a visual representation of what it is you're mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really helpful. Having examples, preferably student examples of previous work, is really helpful. It makes the kids relax more and feel more comfortable. So those are the most common things that I do.
Okay. Michaela, how has communication affected your experience as a student? Or as an employee?
I remember one time back in middle school, Mr. Sheriff's classroom. He specifically said, do not touch any of the supplies. Well, let's just say one of the students didn't listen or didn't hear properly and touched the supplies. And so I think it's really important for people to clearly state the instruction in a way that slower students might be able to understand. So being very specific.
So do you think it's also important for the students to ask clarifying questions when they're unsure?
Very much so.
Okay. Taylor?
Well, I'd say as a new teacher, one of the things that I'm aware of is that the further up in academia you get, the more you start to pick up the sort of jargon and academic discourse that we have. That is, it's good when you're there and you're talking about these big advanced concepts, but when you get back down to the classroom again, you start talking to students. They don't really understand what you're talking about. These are all words and specific phrases that have specific meanings that they don't necessarily have access to. And one of the crops up a lot. One of the ways it crops up is that when teachers and administrators are writing like mission statements and stuff, the paperwork that goes into schools, and they often write it in that same language so that students don't understand it very well, but teachers are supposed to. Except teachers don't really either. So my whole point is basically that when you come up off the academic tower, you got to simplify your language a little bit. You got to step back. You got to keep it in the back of your head for when you need it, but especially when you're addressing students, not to use it so much. Come back to common language.
One of the ways that you can bridge some of that is things like word walls. And, of course, that's why we do vocabulary anyway.
Right.
But you only want to do the most important stuff. You don't want to overload them.
Yeah. Ben, do you have anything you want to add from the student's perspective about how teachers could more effectively communicate with their students, or students could more effectively communicate with their teachers?
Nothing really springs to mind. Be clear, be concise, be specific. There's a lot of stupid people out there.
I like that you brought up the term concise.
You have to be concise. The attention span of the average student is comparable to a goldfish. If it's not short and to the point, you lose them.
Yeah,
Right.
really
On that
fun
note, the actual scientific consensus has been that students have an attention span of approximately 5 minutes beyond their age. So if you're working with middle schoolers, you've got approximately 20 minutes to give instruction before you need to move on to an interactive activity, or you will lose students' focus in your classroom.
I absolutely agree with that.
See, I was going to say that too, but I heard it was just a good rule of thumb to do their age period. Like, it's better to keep things short.
I think that'll give you a safety margin.
Right, better to keep things short and have stuff in your back pocket than go over long and lose them entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is sometimes then you don't get all your lesson across. So chunking your lesson, if you have something like, I could agree with it as long as you would chunk it multiple times. For instance, we're going to block next year, and we've got 90-minute periods. How many, 12 to 14-minute lessons can I give to get my stuff across when it's a 20-minute or 25-minute PowerPoint?
Well, that's why student interaction is so important. It redirects the focus to a specific event or activity, and the students who have either started to lose interest or lose focus or are moving past that portion of the lessons or of the lesson are re-engaged.
Right. All right. So the final thing I'm going to have you guys do is give me your definition of effective communication.
People listen to me. Our definition of effective communication.
So that's tricky though, because
Yeah.
you have two parties involved with communication.
Yeah.
At least.
And so
Okay. Well, then how do you know if your communication is effective?
your eyes aren't glazed over.
Theirs
That's
aren't
simple.
either. What? The
Usually,
task has been completed successfully.
right, and some people like to repeat back to you what you said, but that's not really an indicator per se. At least it's an indicator of listening, but not necessarily active listening.
Okay.
And not always comprehension either.
I guess the end result really is the proof. In the end, because if you're getting a reasonable end result, then you know that you've communicated effectively to the students in general.
Okay. So from a teacher's perspective, would you say that you can gauge your students if the effectiveness of your lesson based on your students' testing or based on their use and retention of the material for later activities?
Me, I'd favor the latter, but I'm a newbie, so I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in that. But I don't know that testing is necessarily the best indicator overall.
Well, that depends on what kind of assessment you're using, Taylor, because there's many formative assessments. I mean, if they're successful in the activity that they're doing, let's say there was a PowerPoint and then that PowerPoint, talked about the distance, out in the solar system and just how far it was.
Right.
And then you took them outside and you had them walk the distance, you give a determinate time or a determinate frame of what an astronomical unit is versus a light year. A light year is 63,000 times the astronomical unit. So, but you could say that an astronomical unit could be 1 inch, and 63,000 away, that you've measured, you could say that this is the light year, and then you could have them use that, and just right there, you would be able to gauge that, and then so you could use it later and say, from here to, the McDonald's, would you use light years for that? Our light years.
Right.
Or would you use, the astronomical unit that's 1 inch? And so you could check for understanding in multiple ways, and then,
I think what I was getting at was the idea of quantitative versus qualitative output. Like, I can see testing as being very, very effective for, testing how much of the quantitative data they've retained, but for qualitative, it's just as important.
All right.
Right, but it also depends on what kind of test.
We're almost out of
you
time.
want.
So, Ben and Michaela, from the student's perspective, how would you communicate more effectively to your teacher? Or how would you, as the student, show the teacher that their communication has been effective? Either as a conversation or as a class forum.
Well, as a class forum, the best way to show the teacher's communication has been effective is retention of the material and participation in class discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not participating in the discussion, then something is missing. And if you're performing poorly in the discussion, then something's been lost in the communication. So if you're performing well, you understand what's being delivered.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another way that I communicate with my teacher, and specifically my history teacher, who's awesome, when he says something that doesn't quite engage the other students, like I can see them dropping off, I personally pay more attention to that part and then make a sarcastic comment, which then re-engages the other students because they find that amusing.
And then
they re-engage as well, which in a sense helps the teacher know, hey, I need to make this part more interesting.
Or more clear.
Yeah.
And your sarcasm is not delivered at the teacher, it's just a comment is it more of a clarifier?
In a way, yeah. He and I trade sarcastic comments.
Oh, okay. I guess he doesn't mind. Interesting.
So we're going to wrap this one up with, does anybody have anything they want to say about the importance of communication in education?
Well, one big thing that hasn't been brought up is nonverbal communication.
Okay.
That's kind of crucial. It doesn't matter how clear or concise you're speaking if your students are not comfortable in your classroom because of how they perceive you.
Okay, that's a very relevant point to bring in.
It's true, Ben.
That's a big one, too, because the attitude that you bring into the classroom has a big effect on your students, whether you know it or not. It's something I've seen a lot in observing classrooms. If you come in and you've already written off your students as, they're just freshmen, they're not going to go very far, they'll pick up on that, and then they won't go very far. So
I can agree with that.
it's important to make sure that your attitude and your heart are in the right place when you go in.
All right, so I actually got to that one a little bit preemptively. Next week, we're going to be talking about nonverbal communication and how we can either improve our nonverbal communication or how it is affecting our ability to either teach effectively or learn effectively in our classrooms.
Very cool. Thank
All
you,
right.
Brianna.
So with that, we will wrap it up.